I'm Carolyn Helpin from the Politics Department, but I think I actually know everyone in this room. Good. Tony Barnstone is the Albert Upton Professor of English Language and Literature at Whittier College. He has a master's degree in English and creative writing from Berkeley, as well as a PhD in English literature from Berkeley. His books of poetry include Tongue of War, From Pearl Harbor to Nagasaki, The Golem of Los Angeles, Sad Jazz Sonnets, and Impure, in addition to a chapbook of poems entitled Naked Magic. Tony is also a distinguished translator of Chinese poetry and literary prose, and an editor of literary textbooks, so he has a large record of publication. Among his awards are the Grand Prize at the Stokestown International Poetry Festival and a Pushcart Prize in Poetry, as well as fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the California Arts Council. Tony was born in Middleton, Connecticut, and raised in Bloomington, Indiana. He's lived in Greece, Spain, Kenya, China, and now Los Angeles. No further ado, let's welcome him.
So I'm going to mix it up a little bit and read different poems of different types with different kinds of moods. And I thought maybe I would start with a few translations just for fun from Chinese. I started translating Chinese poetry, how many decades ago? In the mid-1980s when I was living in China and teaching there. And it was in the post-Mao era and the beginning of the opening up of China. China was moving towards capitalism and moving towards civil rights in the years leading up to Tiananmen Square when it all went bad. But and so I had a lot of encounters with contemporary Chinese poets and worked with them to translate their works into English. Out of that came a lot of years of translating Chinese poetry. The most recent book is this little book called Chinese Erotic Poems, which came about because I did this book, which was a big anthology of Chinese poetry, the anchor book of Chinese poetry. I basically took what I thought was the best of Chinese poetry and put it between two covers. And while doing that, I discovered this rather unknown in the West great erotic literature that was to be found in Chinese erotic novels. You know, you'd be in the middle of the prose, they would throw a poem in, or in Chinese medical manuals, or in these pamphlets that would be given to couples on their wedding night, essentially to teach them how to have sex, with the idea that you never had sex before you got married, and then when you are married, you're supposed to do it right so that you're less likely to have affairs with your neighbors. That's actually what they said in the introduction to these pamphlets. So they would have these illustrated pamphlets. So out of all these sources, plus a lot of literary sources, I derived the poems that became this book. I'll read you a couple poems from this. This is The Secret of the Inner Chamber by a Tang Dynasty literary poet named Li Shangyan, late Tang Dynasty poet. And it's from the point of view of a woman. It's only 4 lines. One of the things you have to know about Chinese erotic poems is that it tends to be a bit encoded. So when the jade stock is the penis, and the dew is the sperm, and the flower is the vagina, and so on. I hope I'm not shocking anybody. Run out of the room screaming if you need to. It's called Secret of the Inner Chamber. My flower holds both red dew and white honey, attracting yellow wasps and purple butterflies, different types. By the spring window, I sleep in dreams of lust. Next to me in the quilt, my husband knows nothing. That's that one. Here's another literary poem. It's from the great Song Dynasty poet Li Qingzhao, considered to be the best Chinese woman poet. It's to the tune of Dream Song. And as I say, you know, although it's encoded and she seems to be talking about nature, I think you'll be able to decipher it. I'll never forget sunset at Brook Pavilion. Drunk with beauty, we lost our way till the ecstasy faded and we turned our boat home. But it was late, and we strayed into a place deep with lotus flowers and rowed hard, so hard the whole shore erupted with herons and gulls. So, orgasm, right? Well, that's Chinese erotic poems. One of the interesting things about translating Chinese poems, of course, is that Chinese poetry, traditional Chinese poetry, is written in form. But a form that's very hard to translate into English. It's got accentual meter, and it has rhyme. And then, of course, it has a rhetorical structure that breaks every poem down into, typically into quatrains and then couplets, and within the couplets, each line is broken up into half lines or caesuras, so that it's sort of a modular building up, very hard to represent in English. So when I discovered this great 20th century Chinese poet named Feng Zhe, who writes sonnets in Chinese, it was a great thing for me because I was able to translate the sonnets as sonnets in English, and the question of form really didn't become so problematic. So I'll just read one or two of his poems. I think they're quite wonderful. This is sonnet number 23 on a puppy. He's a 20th century poet. He died in 1993. On a puppy. For half a month, the rain fell constantly. And ever since the moment of your birth, you've known just clamminess and poverty of light. But now, the rain clouds have dispersed. Illuminating sunlight saturates all the far wall, and so I see your mother take you in her mouth into the sun's utter gentleness, utterly immersed, and taking in for the first time the sunlight's heat. At sunset, she will take you back between her teeth again. You have no memory, but inside you, this incident will dream and meld into your barking deep at night, and then all night you'll bark forth the light. I think it's a beautiful Chinese sonnet, personally. I'll read one more. How about of these two? Sure, why not this one? It's actually quite an interesting philosophical poet. This is sonnet number 16. We stand together on a mountain's crest, projecting vision far across the steppe till sight is lost in the distance. Or else rests where paths spread on the plain and intersect. How can the paths and streams not join? Tossed in sky, can winds and clouds do otherwise? The cities, mountains, rivers that we've crossed become a part of us, become our lives. Our maturation and our grief is near, is a pine tree on a hill over there, is a dense mist in a town over here. We flow inside the waters, blow in air. We are footpaths that crisscross on the plain, and are the people traveling on them. I think he's wonderful. So that's Feng Zhe. Just going to switch gears now. And just for fun, I'm not going to do too much translation, but I have been working with a Kashmiri scientist for the last 3 years, translating the ghazals of the great 19th century Urdu poet Ghalib. The ghazal is in Arabic and Persian and Urdu literature the equivalent of, on the one hand, the sonnet in English, which is to say it is typically a poem of love or of religion, often both, but also of the blues. So the ghazal is written in couplets, but when it's read out loud, the first line of the couplet is repeated. So just like the blues, you have a repeated line, a line that's repeated, and then the punchline that follows. So I'll read this in that way, although they're couplets. The other thing you need to know about the ghazal is that just like the blues, although the blues songs often have through lines, typically each stanza or each verse of the blues kind of stands on its own, and it's very much the same case with the ghazal. So I'm going to go ahead and read this one. It's ghazal 149.